Do you think every family has a villain, or is it more complicated?
I should probably start by saying that birthdays in my family have never been about me, even when the day technically was mine. It always turned into some kind of showcase for my brother, Eric, because my mom has this habit of steering every conversation back to him, whether it's about his grades, his job interviews, or whatever minor achievement she thinks will prove once again that he's destined for greatness, while I am supposedly just floating in his shadow. I've learned to live with it, or at least I thought I had, because it becomes easier to just smile and let her talk than to start another fight that ends with her reminding me of how ungrateful I am. But this year, my 30th birthday, I thought maybe, just maybe, things would be different, because Dad had told me they wanted to do something special and make me feel celebrated for once. I should have known better. The dinner started off politely enough, with a few relatives asking me about work and me giving those short, surface-level answers that don't invite follow-ups. I had invited a couple of people outside the family too, including my mentor from work, who has been a steady presence in my life for years and the one person who makes me feel like I actually matter outside of family politics. She showed up, which felt like a win already, because I knew it would irritate Eric, who always struggles with the fact that I've built meaningful connections without him. I was halfway through a piece of cake when my mom tapped her glass and stood up, and I swear, even before she opened her mouth, I could feel my stomach drop, because I knew it was coming. One of her speeches that sounds like a toast, but is really just another way to push me back down and lift Eric up. She smiled, that kind of smile she uses when she wants people to think she's being loving, but there's a sharpness underneath it. She said something about being proud of me for always working hard, which might have been nice if she had stopped there, but of course she didn't. She followed it up with, but we all know that Eric will always outshine you, because he's just got that spark you can't teach. The room chuckled nervously, as if everyone sensed how cruel it sounded, but nobody dared say anything. I sat there, trying to force a smile, nodding like it didn't cut me in half, because I have been trained since childhood to swallow my anger in front of her. Inside, though, I was boiling. I wanted to slam my fork down and call her out, but then I saw Eric grinning like a smug little prince across the table, and I decided to hold my tongue. The irony, of course, is that Eric wasn't prepared for what came next, and neither was I. My mentor, who had been quiet up until then, leaned forward with this calm, steady voice that carried across the whole table, and she said, "That's interesting, because your son just begged me for a recommendation yesterday." The room went dead silent. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, and I swear Eric's grin disappeared faster than I've ever seen before. His face drained of color, and he looked like he had been punched. Mom blinked like she didn't understand what she had just heard, and Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I stayed quiet, letting the moment stretch out, because for once, the spotlight was on him in the worst possible way. He started stammering, saying it wasn't begging, it was just networking, and that she must have misunderstood, but the way his voice cracked gave him away. He had built this entire persona in front of our family as someone who never needed help, who was effortlessly talented, who glided into success without breaking a sweat. And now, in one simple sentence, that image crumbled. The best part was that I didn't have to say a single word. I just sat back, sipping my drink, acting as if it wasn't my fight, but inside I felt this small flame of satisfaction finally flickering after years of being shoved aside. It wasn't revenge, not yet, but it was the first time in my life that Eric looked vulnerable in front of the people who worshipped him, and I wasn't about to let that go. My mentor didn't even say it with malice. That was the beauty of it. She just dropped the fact as if it were a casual detail, but the weight of it crushed him. He looked at me then, this sharp, panicked glance, like he was begging me not to pile on, not to take advantage of the situation. I kept my mouth shut, but in my head, I was already thinking about how to use this. And here's the thing. When your whole life you've been treated as second best, and suddenly you realize you're holding the kind of truth that could take the golden child off his pedestal, it's like electricity. I could feel it in my chest. For once, I wasn't the one shrinking under Mom's words. I was the one with the upper hand, and Eric knew it. That night, as the dinner wound down and everyone pretended nothing had happened, I caught my mentor's eye. She gave me a look that said, You don't have to play small anymore. I smiled back, but I didn't say anything because I wanted to see how Eric would handle being exposed. And let me tell you, watching him squirm was only the beginning. Because if Mom thought I was going to keep smiling while she praised him over me, she was about to learn that I had a different plan. When the messages started coming in the morning after the dinner, I could tell from the preview lines alone that Eric had decided the best defense was to keep talking until I stopped asking questions. Because he opened with this long explanation about how my mentor must have misinterpreted his outreach and how he was simply exploring options like any ambitious professional. And then he slid into that tone he uses when he wants to sound generous and older brother wise, telling me that family should support each other and that I needed to be careful not to ruin opportunities over a misunderstanding, as if the problem here were my lack of grace rather than the fact that he had just been caught trying to dress my work in his clothes. I let him keep going, because his style has always been to fill the air with proclamations and hope no one notices the seams, and I have learned that the more he talks the more he confesses without meaning to, so I just replied with one line asking which role he needed the recommendation for and whether he planned to include a list of projects he personally owned, and the silence that followed told me everything I needed to know about what he planned to steal. By lunchtime, my mother had apparently been briefed, because I got the predictable call where she sighed the way people do when they are already annoyed and said that I was making a big deal out of nothing, that everyone asks for recommendations, that this is how the world works, and that I should be happy for my brother because his success makes the family look good, while mine, she did not say but strongly implied, never quite does, which was the same speech I have heard since high school. Whenever he wanted something that belonged to me, whether that was a friend, a lead, or credit for a group project, I stayed up half the night to finish. I asked her very calmly if she understood that he had pitched my metrics and my process as his, and she made one of those little sounds that mothers make when they want to shut a door without slamming it, then pivoted to asking what I was wearing to a cousin's event next weekend, which is her version of throwing a blanket over a fire and hoping it goes out on its own. I met my mentor after work, and the relief of sitting across from someone who does not treat me like a spare part hit me hard enough that I had to take a breath before I spoke, and she, being who she is, saved me from having to perform by sliding her phone across the table and opening the email thread before I asked, saying gently that she thought I should see what he sent, not because she wanted to put me through it, but because clarity is power when people are trying to scramble your sense of reality. The notes were worse than I expected, not because he had asked for help, which I would not have begrudged if he had done it honestly, but because he had copied language from a case study I wrote last year. He had stitched together phrases that were unmistakably mine, and he had framed the results as something he led end to end. Even though he did not sit in a single difficult meeting when that project was on fire, and did not field a single weekend call when a vendor failed and I had to babysit a fix until midnight. My mentor did not push me. She simply asked what I wanted to do, and the kindest thing she did in that moment was refuse to make it about morality or family duty, because she knows those words have been used to shut me up for too long. So she kept it focused on boundaries and consent and the basic fact that no one gets to use my work without permission, and if they try, I am allowed to protect it without being called dramatic. I told her I wanted this dealt with by the book, not because I am a saint, but because I know the best revenge is often the most boring paper trail, the kind you can read aloud in any room without blushing. And she nodded and said that the company courting him is a partner that respects process, which means they will not touch someone who plays sloppy with ownership or confidentiality. So we did something very simple and very clean, and it felt better than any screaming match ever has. She introduced me over email to the recruiting lead at the partner firm with a neutral line about clarifying portfolio authorship on a few public-facing items that had been referenced in a recent conversation. And I followed with a calm note that did not mention family or feelings or last night's disaster. I just stated that certain case studies circulating informally were my work product and contained non-public learnings that should not be represented as another person's leadership without written authorization. And I attached the public versions with my name on them and provided a timeline of publication with links that anyone can verify in under a minute. Then I closed with a sentence saying I am happy to answer questions about scope if it helps them maintain compliance. There was no accusation, no heat, no theater, just the kind of careful language that lands like a quiet door locking, and within an hour I saw the read receipts stack up, which told me that the right people had seen it. And then my mentor forwarded me a brief reply from the recruiting lead thanking us for the context and confirming that their next step would be to request an authenticated walkthrough of any project being claimed, preferably with artifacts and access logs, which, if you have ever watched a bluffer try to bluff in a room full of adults, you know is not a hoop he can clear with confidence. My phone started buzzing again, and this time it was Eric switching from charm to pressure, telling me I had crossed a line and that I was poisoning the well, adding that if I continued, Mom would be heartbroken and Dad would take his side, which, to be honest, was not the devastating warning he thought it was, because that well has never been mine to drink from. I did not reply, because the reply had already been sent to the only people whose opinion mattered in this situation, and as I walked home I realized that for the first time in a long time I was not bracing for the family fallout. I was looking forward to the professional follow-through, the kind that does not require a raised voice or a dramatic scene, just a calendar invite and a shared screen and a simple request to open the dashboard and walk the panel through the build he says he led, and when he realizes that the room expects receipts and that the receipts are my name on every milestone, I will not need to say a single word. Because the cleanest revenge is letting the process do the talking while I sit quietly and watch the golden child calculate how he is going to explain the missing pieces tomorrow morning. By the time lunchtime rolled around the next day, my brother had cycled through every version of himself he keeps on the shelf for emergencies, because he started with the contrite older sibling who claims he only wanted guidance and would have credited me later, slid quickly into the reasonable professional who talks about market realities and how everyone borrows language, drifted into the martyr who worries about Mom's nerves and Dad's disappointment, and finally landed on the pushy operator who tells me I am being reckless and emotional and making enemies I cannot afford, which would have been funny if it had not been the same tired script I have heard since we were kids, and he learned that raising his voice and invoking our parents can get him out of anything. I let him talk himself out while I typed a short, polite update to the recruiting lead my mentor had introduced me to, confirming that I would be available for any authorship verification steps they needed, mentioning that I can provide dated drafts, meeting summaries, and access logs for the systems in question, and adding that I am happy to join a brief call to outline scope, because nothing clears the fog faster than a calm record that points to a trail anyone can follow. He must have seen that email hit because within minutes he was on the phone, not even pretending to be calm, and he said that I was trying to embarrass him in front of people who could change his life, that I was punishing him for Mom's favoritism, that I was going to split the family for good, and I told him in one long breath that this is not about childhood or Mom's dinner speeches or the family group chat. This is about him taking my work and presenting it as his, and that I will not sign off on a lie, and if that makes him uncomfortable, then maybe he should do the one thing he always avoids, which is tell the truth. He pivoted to bargaining, offering to add my name somewhere in a footnote, offering to loop me in once he secured the role, offering to tell Mom he had been unfair the night of my birthday. And I said I am not interested in a pity credit or a backdated thank you. I am interested in a clean line between what is mine and what is not, and then I hung up before he could start crying, because I have learned that the tears are never for me, they are for the audience. Dad called next and tried the peacekeeping tone that sounds like a boardroom closing argument, saying that I know how proud they are of me, that families make mistakes, that I should not torch a bridge over what he called a clerical issue. And I told him I am not torching anything, I am simply refusing to build a bridge out of my work and then watch someone else cross it while I clap from the shore, and he went quiet in that thoughtful way he does when he realizes I am not moving, and then he changed the subject to logistics for a cousin's brunch, as if the weather had shifted and the storm would pass on its own if we stopped talking about it. While all of that was happening, my mentor forwarded me a note from the recruiting lead confirming a plan that felt almost too neat to be real. An authenticated walkthrough later that week where the candidate would be asked to demonstrate ownership by pulling up artifacts, walking through decisions, and answering questions about trade-offs, with the note that they welcome the original author to attend for clarity if collaboration is asserted, which is the professional version of placing a spotlight on a stage and asking whoever claims the solo to step into it without a script. I replied that I would attend if helpful, that I would keep my answers strictly within the bounds of what is already public or permitted by our partner agreement, and that I would defer to the panel on scope. And the recruiting lead wrote back a thank you that included a calendar invite and a tidy list of agenda points, every one of which mapped to decisions I made and documented and defended when the project was on fire and my brother was nowhere to be found. Eric must have seen the invite on his end, because the next message I got was a screenshot of a drafted email he wanted me to send to the partner, calling the whole thing a misunderstanding and asking to move forward without the authorship review, along with a ridiculous offer that he clearly thought sounded generous, because he proposed to mention me in a future press release as a collaborator if I would just back off now and let this one slide, and I laughed out loud in a way that was not pretty but felt like oxygen, then sent a single sentence to my mentor saying that pressure had escalated and that I would be forwarding any further attempts to circumvent the process to the recruiting lead so they had the full picture, which I did, attaching his messages without comment because nothing I could write would be more revealing than his own words. That evening I posted a bland professional update on my profile about speaking the following week on lessons learned from a major rollout, tagging no one, promising no details, simply inviting anyone interested in change management pitfalls to ping me for the public deck, and within an hour I got 3 messages from people I respect, 2 from our side and 1 from the partner, saying they were looking forward to it, which told me exactly how visible the authorship question had already become, and how little I needed to do beyond standing still while the truth caught up. Eric called again, this time with an apology that sounded like a script his friend in sales wrote for him, and he asked me to meet him the next morning, just the 2 of us, so he could explain and maybe show me something that would change my mind. And even though every instinct told me it was a trap, I said yes, not because I expected clarity from him, but because I wanted the final piece I suspected he would bring to the table when cornered. He showed up early with a folder he slid across the table like a magic trick, and inside was a non-disclosure agreement he wanted me to sign along with a typed statement saying that the disputed case study had been a team effort led by Eric, and that any confusion had been resolved amicably, plus a promise of future equity consideration in a venture he was spinning up. And I looked at the papers and then at him and said very calmly that offering hush paperwork to your sister over coffee is not a good look, and that I would be taking this folder to the walkthrough since it spoke directly to character and process, and as his face dropped and he started to reach for the pages, I pulled them back and said the only thing left to say, which was that if he truly believed he could defend authorship, he did not need me to sign anything at all, and if he could not, then this was already over, and he whispered that I was going to ruin him, and I told him he was doing that on his own and I was just done helping him hide it, and then I stood up, thanked him for the materials, and walked out because the next room would not require opinions, it would require proof, and for the first time in my life, I had more of it than he did. The morning of the walkthrough I woke up with that wired calm that shows up when you have already done the hard part, and all that is left is to let the room do what it was designed to do. So I made coffee, checked the agenda one more time, confirmed the documents I had already sent were sitting in the recruiting leads folder with clear file names and timestamps that make auditors smile, and then I logged in a few minutes early and kept my camera off because there was no need to make this personal when the point today was proof, not theater, and the panel trickled in with those polite greetings professionals use when they know an uncomfortable conversation is coming, but intend to keep it tidy. The lead set the tone in a way I appreciated by stating that they value clear authorship, that the purpose of the session was to verify ownership and decision-making on specific projects named in the candidacy materials, and that they would ask the candidate to walk through artifacts live after which any collaborator could add context, which landed exactly the way we planned because it left no door open for vague credit or a story about team spirit that conveniently erases who actually carried the weight when things went sideways. My brother launched into what he clearly thought was a tight overview, and for a few minutes I let him run his slides, because I have learned that people who overinflate their contributions will inevitably break their own story if you hand them enough rope. So he talked about setting milestones and aligning stakeholders and architecting the rollout, and it sounded plausible in that smooth way he has, until the lead gently asked him to open the actual dashboard he said he built and show how he defined the threshold that triggered the second phase, at which point I watched him stall and mumble about access, then failed to log in on the first try, then pretend that a browser extension was misbehaving. And the room went quiet in that particular way where you can tell everyone has already filed away the first red flag without saying a word. The lead waited, and to his credit did not embarrass him outright, but asked a simpler question instead, which was what rollback window he had configured. When the vendor failed in the early hours on the East region, and when he said something about a standard hour by default, I unmuted and said, as evenly as I could manage, that the vendor's default had been half that. That we had extended it after the first incident because it created a human maintenance gap during handoff, and that the decision was documented in the post-mortem alongside the access log that shows my account owning the change, which I would be happy to forward again if it helped. The review. The recruiting lead thanked me in that brisk way that signals the point is noted, asked my brother if he could screen share the post-mortem or point to the change record, and when he could not, the lead moved to the next topic with professional grace, asking him to walk through the rationale behind a metric that showed up in his slide as if it were ours, and I could feel the room lean in as he tried to paraphrase logic that only makes sense when you have lived through the fight over definitions. So he said something vague about balancing precision and recall, and I added, because clarity is not cruelty, that the metric he was trying to describe had been a compromise hammered out between our partner, and my team after a week of haggling over privacy boundaries and sampling error, that the final formula was published in a public deck with my name on it, and that the underlying debate is documented in the email thread he has probably seen because he lifted my language from it, which I did not need to say with heat because the panel had already connected the dots. When the lead asked whether there had been any attempts to resolve the authorship questions offline, I said there had, and that I had forwarded relevant communications to him privately, including a draft non-disclosure agreement and a typed statement my brother asked me to sign, which described the disputed case as a team effort led by him and promised future equity consideration if I would agree that any confusion was resolved. And I left it at that because the offer speaks loudly without me adding adjectives. The silence that followed was not long, but it was heavy, and then the lead thanked me again and said they would take a 5-minute pause to confirm access rights for the artifacts we needed, which gave me just enough time to mute, breathe, and notice my phone lighting up with a new barrage from my brother telling me I was destroying his chances and that I should remember what this would do to Mom, which did not land in the way he intended because at that point I felt done letting our mother's blood pressure be the leash around my neck. During the second half of the call, the panel shifted into a checklist mode that I recognized from audits, and each item they asked for lined up with a decision I had owned, so when they asked about the risk log, I volunteered to open the sanitized version we circulated to the partner last quarter and walked them through the 3 entries that mattered most, and when they asked about the deployment calendar, I shared the public copy with edit history visible and let the scroll speak for itself. And when they asked about stakeholder sign-offs, I pointed to the names and dates that sit on the document without embellishment, and every time I paused the lead would say thank you and then ask my brother if he had anything to add. And each time he would say no in a smaller voice, and somewhere in the middle of that my satisfaction shifted from a spike of vindication to something steadier and quieter, like the feeling of finally putting down a weight you have carried for too long and realizing no one is going to make you pick it up again. At the close, the recruiting lead said they appreciated the clarity, that they would pause the candidacy while they completed a compliance review, that they would follow up with written notes for both of us, and that any future discussions would require verified authorship for every claim, and I said that sounded fair and thanked them for their time. Then logged off and sat still in the quiet for a long minute before forwarding the non-disclosure packet to the ethics address listed in the partner's policy with a short line saying that I believed it pertained to their review. My mentor called before I could stand, said the session had been exactly what it needed to be, and asked how I felt, and I told her I felt like someone had finally shut a door that should have been closed years ago. And just as I said it, my phone pinged with a new email, and when I opened it, I saw the subject line from the partner's legal team stating that they had initiated a formal investigation and would be contacting my brother directly with next steps, including notice of potential disqualification and partner notification, which meant the next voice he would hear would not be mine or hers or our mother's. And as I stared at the screen and let that sink in, his name flashed across my phone with an incoming call I did not intend to answer, because this time the explanation would not go through me, and the only question left hanging in the air was how far the fallout would travel once the notice landed tomorrow morning. The notice landed the next morning the way serious emails always do, with a subject line that is dry enough to sound harmless and a sender list that tells you it is anything but, and when I opened it I saw the partner's legal team had concluded their review, had disqualified my brother from further consideration on the basis of misrepresented authorship and attempted suppression of a collaborating party, had documented their findings for internal audit, and had copied the recruiting lead along with my mentor with a final paragraph that asked me, if I was open to it, to discuss a limited advisory scope tied to the very rollout he had tried to claim, which I read twice to make sure I was not projecting what I wanted onto neutral language. Then I put my phone face down and sat very still because I knew the next thing that would happen would not be professional, it would be personal, and I wanted to decide in advance how much of that storm I was willing to let in. He called first, and I let it go to voicemail because I had no interest in being the wall he threw blame at until it stuck, and then my mother called with the tone she saves for emergencies that threaten her version of our family story, asking me if I had any idea what I had done and whether I understood the consequences for my brother's future, and because I've spent too many years letting that question erase me, I told her very calmly that what happened was not something I did to him. It was something he did in rooms where he assumed I would be too polite or too scared to challenge it, and that if she wanted to talk to me as her daughter, she was welcome to ask me how I was feeling about being humiliated at my own birthday, and then ask to sign away my work over coffee. And she went quiet for a long beat before saying she did not know about any paperwork, which meant either he had not told her or she had chosen not to hear it, and I decided in that moment that the only way I would get through this with my sanity intact was to stop arguing about feelings with people who treat facts like inconveniences. So I did something that would have felt impossible to me a year ago, which is that I told her I was willing to come by that evening, not to fight, not to rehash childhood scores, but to say out loud the new rules for how I plan to participate in this family. And she said she would make dinner, and I said that would not be necessary because this was not a celebration and because food is her favorite way to blur lines when the conversation gets uncomfortable, and then I called my mentor and said yes to the advisory discussion with the partner on the condition that their announcement, if it came to that, would carry clear authorship and would not use vague language like collaboration that could be spun later by people who prefer the version where the golden child remains golden. And she said that was reasonable and that she would sit in the first call because she wanted me to see what it looks like when a door opens for you because you kept your ground rather than because you softened it. At my parents' house that evening, my brother was already there with that look he gets when he wants to win by exhaustion, and before he could launch into his speech, I told him I had one sentence, and then he could talk for as long as he liked. And the sentence was that I do not owe him silence to protect a reputation he built on pretending my work was his, and that from today forward any attempt to use my name privately while erasing it publicly would be forwarded to whoever needed to see it. And then I shut up and let him empty the bag he brought, which included a lot of words about loyalty and optics and family brands, and how this would follow him, and when he was done our mother did what she always does, which is try to wrap the mess in a softer story by saying we are all talented in our own ways and should not tear each other down, and I told her I agree with the first half of that sentence and refuse the second, because asking me to let a lie stand so she can sleep better is not peacekeeping, it is complicity, and I am not doing it anymore. He asked me what would make this right, and I said there is no version where you get to rewrite last week. There is only the version where you stop pretending that borrowing is the same as building, where you email the partner and say you misrepresented authorship and you understand their decision, where you update your profile so the case study you lifted is no longer listed under your leadership, and where you stop asking me to be quiet about things you did because you're afraid of how it looks when people see you without the padding. And he stared at me like I had spoken a language he never planned to learn, then asked if I would at least tell Mom that we were good, and I said we are not good, we are clear. And that is better for both of us than fake good, which he did not like but did understand, because clarity is hard to argue with when the paper trail is sitting in your inbox with a legal department's signature block attached. 2 days later, the partner posted a clean, boring advisory announcement that named me and described the scope in terms that anyone in our world would recognize as meaningful, and I sent the link to my parents without commentary. Because I have learned that the quietest statement often lands the loudest when people are used to you pleading for their approval, and my father replied with a short congratulations that felt awkward but sincere. And my mother sent a heart she would later claim was for both of her children, and my brother did not reply at all, which, if I am being honest, was a small mercy because it meant he had finally run out of versions of himself to sell me. I wish I could tell you that from there everything became tidy and that my mother stopped saying the kind of thing she said at my birthday, but the truth is that people do not drop their favorite stories overnight, so I am not promising myself miracles. I am promising myself boundaries, and the first one is that any room where my value is measured by how well I keep the peace while someone else takes the credit is a room I do not plan to stand in for long, and the second is that I will not let my wins be turned into cautionary tales about being too ambitious, and the third is that when I am asked to make myself smaller for family harmony, I will remember how it felt to sit on that walkthrough and watch the process quietly put my name back where it belonged, and I will choose that feeling again without apology. When my mentor asked me how I wanted to mark the advisory announcement, I said I did not need a party or a toast or a victory lap. I just wanted to go somewhere quiet and send one email to myself with the subject line that mattered more than any public post, which was a promise that I would never again dim the light on my own work to make someone else more comfortable. And after I typed it and pressed send, I felt something unclench that I had been holding since I was a kid, and I realized that the last move in this whole mess was not the investigation or the announcement or even my brother's silence. It was me choosing to stop asking for permission to be the author of my own work, and as simple as that sounds, it changed the temperature of every room I walked into after, which is why when people ask if I finally got revenge, I say the process took care of him and the boundary took care of me, and between the two, I am exactly where I wanted to end up.